the national office recommended as key for us.
Wonderful. Well, it's a few minutes after 5, and I'm wondering if we should go ahead and get started, just to be mindful of everyone's time this evening. And as more people come in, we'll go ahead and let everyone in. So welcome everyone tonight to our post-election town hall. We're very happy to have you join us today. We're going to be talking today about how social workers can stay engaged in the elections process and the policy process. And we'll also be recapping everything that has happened since November 6th as best as we can here. As we know, every day, every minute, there's something new happening, especially as of 5 minutes ago. So I'll go ahead and I'll let our co-host introduce themselves, and I'll introduce myself last. Dwayne, would you like to go ahead and go?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Dwayne Brijack. I'm the Director of Member Services at NASW-Michigan, and I also did quite a bit of campaign work this last year.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Justin Hodge. I'm a clinical assistant professor at the University of Michigan School of Social Work, and I am a newly elected Washtenaw County Commissioner.
Awesome. And I'm Algeria Wilson. I'm your Director of Public Policy. So I'm happy to have you all here tonight. Just a quick flow of the agenda of how things will go today. We do want to take a moment to process just briefly with everyone about how they're feeling after the coup at the Capitol and everything we saw last week that happened at our U.S. Capitol. We'll be discussing the winners and the losers of the Michigan election, how social workers did with the MPACE election, how MPACE was able to influence the Michigan election, and what does this new administration mean for social work, and how does NASW contribute to the next administration's policy agenda, and also how, of course, social workers can stay engaged and involved. So first, let's just check in a little bit. There has been a lot that has gone on, especially last week. And so, Duane, I don't know how you want to open up this conversation, but we really just want to hear from you all about what are your thoughts and feelings about what happened, and just give you a moment to process. Let me actually.
I think that's really our hope for this part of the time is just if folks want to unmute or if they want to type into the chat box, anything that you have been processing or feeling over the last week. Obviously, we also have news in the last 10, 20 minutes that the president has been impeached for a second time. Obviously, that process is not complete and it will be going to the Senate, but big news that we need to make sure that we're including in our conversation today. So if anybody feels free sharing how they've been feeling the last week, we'd be happy to process that with you.
If I could, I'll go first here, and maybe this will, give you all some thought and help contribute to this conversation. There's a couple of thoughts that I have about what happened. First, I've heard a conversation about how this happened, right? We know that, or so we've heard that there's been like inside jobs that potentially could have happened to allow this to happen, especially to this capacity. But what I find so interesting about it is I think this is also a result of policymakers who have been in power, who are more wealthy potentially more wealthy than a lot of the individuals we saw go into the Capitol. And not necessarily, but what happens when we have, middle-class white Americans who are taken advantage of, right, to some extent, with high-level policymakers. And so, they've been upset at the fact that their politicians didn't deliver the results that they want, right? And so they went ahead and went forwards and had this attack on the Capitol. So that's one argument that I've heard, which I thought was pretty interesting, like, especially as we think about socioeconomic status. But then also there's definitely been an uprising, or whatever you want to call this, insurrectionist and the coup at the Capitol, that is deeply rooted in systemic racism. And we can't ignore that. There were nooses aside the U.S. Capitol. And so I think those are all those are all very important to think about when we look at the events that happened last week. So I'm disappointed that it occurred, but a part of me is not surprised because we've seen such division for so long. Racial division, socioeconomic division, any division that you can think of, it has happened and it has occurred. And so at some point, some version of an arising or uprising was going to happen. Some version of an attack, right, was going to happen. So those are some of my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I'll jump in and add on to that, and thinking about the racial dynamic to this, because one of the things that particularly disturbed me about this, and something that I want us as social workers to be thinking about in our work to promote racial justice, is that if this were this terrorist attack, if this had been done by people of color, we know the response would have been much different. This terrorist attack, you could find video all over the internet of people that were guided away gently by the wrists by police officers, and we've seen peaceful protests for racial justice that the response from law enforcement has been very, very different. And I mean, so seeing that was the first thing that jumped out at me as I was watching it happen live. But then also as I'm thinking about it on that day, it was also the day that I was sworn into office as Washtenaw County Commissioner. So it was just a weird juxtaposition between seeing this happening and then thinking about my role in government and working to help defend and protect our democracy. But then also as a person, it's just so disturbing, and thinking about how me being in elected office, how that affects my family. Like my family, knowing that I'm going to be sworn in that day, was very concerned, seeing what's happening to lawmakers on TV, knowing that we've had some of the people that have done similar things in Michigan at our Michigan Capitol. And we know that many people were bused from Michigan to the U.S. Capitol to participate in that. So it's just thinking about how me getting into this work to try to make a difference positively through policy is making my family really worried. And that's disturbing.
Mm-hmm. I also think it highlighted just how, which we've already known, right? How fragile our systems are within the U.S., especially we've seen this during COVID, but also just how fragile, it really showed how fragile our systems are and how much distrust that people have in our systems, how easily individuals can be coaxed or conned to believe certain things or feel emboldened to react on certain messages that have gone through. We saw President Trump's, well, maybe he's not going to be the president too much longer, but we saw his social media accounts be deleted and blocked due to some of the conversations that and information and rhetoric that he put out, which was really harmful and really helped to incite this attack. So I think it's very important to understand that. I also think that everything that happened really just gave us a breach in security as a nation, made us look very weak and vulnerable as a nation. And I hope this is something that the incoming administration can re-strengthen, because I think we look very, very bad to the rest of the world here with that happening. Oh, we have a raise.
Absolutely. Hand up.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dwayne.
Oh, I see Abby's hand.
Yeah, hi. I just like to add, I mean, of course, it's the racial issues are blatantly obvious. And I'd like to add that we noticed, everyone, that there were people wearing sweatshirts, at least one saying Camp Auschwitz. There were lots of anti-Semitic things going on. We know that the people who were there are basically against any minority. But when we see things like this, they always target minorities, and they always target Jews. It always becomes an anti-Semitic issue in addition to a racist issue. And I just like to say that, as I know you're speaking as African Americans, that we as Jews, myself being a Jew, we also feel targeted. And when you see something like Camp Auschwitz and want to feel, this is our capital, this is our country, we're Americans, and see something like that and think that I don't have a big family or many relatives because they were killed at Auschwitz and places like that, that hits us right at the heart. And it doesn't feel like this is our capital and this is our country and they're speaking to us. And I also wanted to, okay, thanks, to add, I listened to a lot of what was happening today at the Capitol, especially the representatives from Ohio, Republican representative from Ohio, and I think it was Arizona speaking. And it seems like they don't even understand why people want Trump impeached. And it didn't seem like that when I was hearing the people who wanted him impeached, they were explaining it very carefully that we want him impeached, not just as a punishment, not to slap him on the wrist, but because what he did needs to be punished, because it needs to send a message saying that a sitting president cannot do this, that this was treason, and it needs to be a message that this cannot be done. And I'm going to stop here because all of these things that I'm saying can be expounded upon by others if they choose. Thank you.
I think we certainly need to consider calling a spade, as you mentioned, Abby, and this was a pure act of white supremacy. I have said in a couple other meetings that we do as social workers need to be careful of the language we use. I know a lot of individuals are referring to this as, domestic terrorism or these individuals as terrorists. But I think whenever we use that term terrorist, and I've seen this in a tweet as well from a staff member at ACLU, Massachusetts, they mentioned that those terms are typically used against Black and Brown individuals. And right now, as we are having these conversations around defunding the police, we see, local officials now preparing to up police presence and up this militarization to protect their state capitals and their neighborhoods from this level of attack again. But how easily that can be used against individuals of color. So I just wanted to, make sure we are cognizant of that as a profession.
Yeah, Alger, I appreciate that comment. I think language is so important right now as we continue to have these really hard conversations. One of the things that I've been struggling with since last week is really the silence from many of my conservative family around everything that's gone on. And it feels very much like complicity in the situation. And I think many of us, many social workers and many families are having these really hard conversations with one another, and probably have for the last 4 years at least, about values and conflict. And I'm wrestling with how to appropriately call in and call out people, as well as when is the cutoff, what's appropriate to keep in my life as a self-care boundary, and what relationships are important to keep, but also wanting to push people to think outside of their normal boxes. And it's been really fairly sad to see, at least in many of my conservative circles of family and friends, just the complete lack of recognition of anything that went on in the last week. And so that's just been something that I've been processing a lot. And I did see Kent put in a comment. It looks like it's private to us in Lansing, but do you have any safety concerns on Inauguration Day working in Lansing? So I appreciate you asking that, Ken. I'm not super worried about that. We're working remotely, so I think all of us are far enough away from the Capitol that it doesn't feel like that immediate. However, I think it has been scary, and we saw in Michigan earlier this summer, we were kind of the model for what happened last week. We had the first group of major people that were out at our Capitol and tried to kidnap the governor, right? And so I think it's important that we keep protections in place. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And part of what we're going to be talking about the rest of today is some specific things that we think are really necessary going forward. And social work covers such a broad range of policy interests and issues that's why we're so happy that you all are here to help share what you all feel is critical right now and how we can move forward in the next administration. So does anybody else have anything that they'd like to share about how they've been feeling and what's been going on the last couple of weeks?
There was a ban on open carry in Lansing to the Capitol. However, if you still have your gun, concealed, you can still come in. So, it's a step in the right direction, as we say, but it's not truly going to solve all the issues. So hopefully we can soon at some point have a complete ban on weapons, but we'll see what happens.
So I appreciate everybody also commenting in the chat box. We are going to, a little bit later, break into breakout rooms, so we'll have a little bit more time to talk intimately with one another about kind of some of our big priorities for this year. But let's go ahead and then move on from the last week's worth of stuff and get talking about how did things go in November. Algeria?
Yeah, so MPACE is very, very influential at NASW. And I just want to put it in a little bit of context for individuals. So, our MPACE is our PAC, it's our political action committee, and they're responsible for really helping, fundraise and get social workers elected to office. It is a member-driven PAC. When we think about PACs just in the large context, we know like UAW has PACs, and the Restaurant Association right now, who is lobbying hard, has PACs. And legislators look to them to be endorsed, to be supported in their election and their race. And those PACs have strong influence at the Capitol when it comes to introducing legislation. So we have 28,000 social workers in Michigan and a strong membership here. And so what we hope to do is, grow our PAC to the point where we are strong just like those PACs, right? Not that we're not strong and that we don't have a strong presence, but an even stronger presence. So MPACE this year, first our PAC at the national office, they endorsed Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but also Gary Peters from Michigan, Hillary Schulten, Dan Kildee, and Kimberly Bison. Hillary Schulten did not make it, as well as Kimberly Bison, I don't believe. So we have Gary Peters as well as Dan Kildee, and they both are very strong advocates for NASW. Gary Peters has, been around for a while, and Dan Kildee, we worked with him on EITC, and we'll continue to work with him on EITC as Earned Income Tax Credit, and we'll continue to work with him on those. On a state level, and I'll actually just put a link in the chat for everyone because I'm not sure you get a chance to visit the website as often as you should. We endorsed Christine Morse for the House, Alex Garza, Lori Pahutsky, Matthew Stoll, Kelly Breen, Julia Pulver, Pat Makupa, Cheryl Kennedy, Felicia Breijak, Stephanie Moore, Jim Hodsma, Angela Whitwer, Bill Saxton, Dan O'Neill, Eli Savitt, Justin Hodge here, Charlie Cavell, Dominique Clemens, and Bridget McCormick and Elizabeth Welch. So both support Michigan Supreme Court justices were elected. Our local officials were elected. So Charlie Cavell, Dominique Clemens, Justin Hodge, Eli Savitt, who ran for county prosecutor in Washtenaw County, who is going to do some amazing things. He was elected. Angela Whitwer was elected, Felicia Breijak, Pa Makupa, Kelly Breen, Lori Pahutsky, Christine Morse, Alex Garza. I hope I didn't miss anyone there. But it just goes to show the power of NASW and the allies we have in the legislature. As it relates to social workers, we have Justin Hodge here, we have Charlie Cavell, and we have Felicia Breijak, very strong allies in our Michigan legislature. And we'll look to them to really be able to help us pass legislation, support sound legislation, and also oppose legislation. I believe today was the first day back for the 101st Michigan legislature. So they began to select committees for everyone. And as soon as we learn what committees, especially our elected officials, will be in who are social workers, we'll certainly let our membership know so that, you can be active and engaged in the legislation that comes from those committees. As it relates to leadership in the House, we have the Jason Wentworth, who is the Speaker of the House, and he's a Republican. We have Speaker-elect, let's see here, Wentworth, his leadership as the floor leader. And we have the House Democratic leader, Donna Lazinski, who is also a strong ally for NASW. And then as minority floor leader is Yusuf Rabi, who is also a strong leader to an ally to Michigan. So we have some interesting dynamics, but we'll continue to work with all of our floor leaders and speakers of the House to really be able to pass legislation that's needed for Michigan. So I don't know if there was any questions as relates to that, or if we want to just go to the next slide and jump into our policy priorities. All right. So policy priorities. Who sets our policy priorities as Michigan, as an association? It is our Legislative Social Policy Committee. They help drive, our policy agenda. And although our policy agenda is typically broad, there are times where we really want to narrow things down and prioritize certain areas for the year to be able to pass certain legislation and focus on specific initiatives. And so this year, as a whole entire association, we've decided to really focus our priorities towards areas that we can help achieve racial justice, because it is certainly needed, especially after 2020 and the past 4 years, right? So in order to focus on our policy priorities, we're aligning them with Dr. Kindy's 6 key corrective policy areas to achieve racial justice. And from those, we selected criminal justice, health and health equity, environment, economic security, politics, and housing is also one, but we have professional practice in here. And I believe housing can go under economic security for us. But as it relates to criminal justice, we'll be focused on emergency response legislation, especially towards the criminal justice system, and making sure that we have mental health professionals helping to respond to prevent individuals from going to jail or prison, and any like-minded deflection or diversion efforts. So anything that will help, again, prevent people from being incarcerated. Health and health equity will continue to focus on telehealth and behavioral health efforts, as well as workforce expansion within those areas. The environment, which you may have seen towards the lame duck area, or the lame duck time in the season, where we really strongly supported Senate Bill 241, which is the Water Restoration Act here, to ensure that no one's water was cut off during the pandemic, to make sure that water was restored. And so we'll continue to focus on environmental issues. Drinking water is very important to us, and healthy food access. When it comes to economic security, we'll continue to support and actually support more stronger than we have before safety net programs. So SNAP, TANF, and again, earned income tax credit, we know is very critical to the populations we serve. Within the professional practice, which is social workers who we advocate for, first, it's really strengthening our ASWB pass rates. We need a more diverse and inclusive field. Data transparency as it relates to ASWB so that we can know who's passing, who's failing, and what that dynamic looks like. And that'll help our universities really strengthen their curriculum. We'll also continue to focus on telehealth reimbursement rates right now. We know that has been an issue for many social workers. And so we'll continue to advocate for you on behalf of that. As relates to politics, we want to, again, always encourage and support voting rights. The Voting Rights Act at the national level is very important. Our MPACE efforts, such as raising our PAC funds, as I talked about at the beginning, preparing social workers to run and get elected to office, to be involved and engaged in political efforts is very important. So those will be our main priority areas to start off with for the 2021 year. And as anything else emerges, we will begin to prioritize those as well. So that is our policy priorities for Michigan.
Great, thanks, Algeria. I'm curious, Justin, as a new lawmaker or a new person to elected office, what were some of your goals when you ran for office, and what do you hope to achieve at the local level?
Thank you. Yeah, so my campaign centered on opportunity for all. So working to make Washtenaw County a place where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and be successful. I focus specifically on health, wealth, and safety. A lot of people tend to think of Washtenaw County as being this really wealthy county because University of Michigan is there and there's a bunch of other resources. That's not necessarily the case, and it's not the case for most people. Washtenaw County is actually one of the most economically segregated regions in the entire country. And there's a lot of concentrated poverty in my district and in other parts of more rural parts of the county as well. So a lot of what I want to do is work to promote equity across the county and making sure that people, whether you're in the Ann Arbor area or you're in Ypsilanti or you're in Manchester, that you're getting access to any health services that you need and that people are able to build wealth, purchase a home if they would like, and develop assets. A big thing for me has been work that I've done before on children's savings accounts. I was part of a group that helped start the Lansing Save program. If anybody is in Lansing is aware of that, but it's a college, it's a savings account program for kids in the Lansing School District where they get a college savings account that we worked to get private and public matches for it. Because there's a lot of research around that shows that if you grow up going through K through 12 with a college savings account, even if you don't graduate with a ton of money in it, you're about 4 times more likely to go on to post-secondary education, just because you've developed this mentality over the years that you're saving to go to college. So it's far more effective than scholarships. So I'm hoping to bring programming like that to Washtenaw County, as well as combating predatory lending. Predatory lending is an issue that the state would really need to step in. So that refers to like those check cashing places that charge people really absurd interest rates where people get trapped into a cycle of debt and poverty and can't really get out of it. So I've been thinking of some creative ways that we can try to tackle that at the county level. So a lot of those, and of course the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic has been a challenge everywhere, particularly in Washtenaw County. 2 of the zip codes in my district are the 2 that are hardest hit by the pandemic. So continuing to work with our health department, which they've been doing an excellent job, but continuing to do that work to make sure that everyone has access to. Well, the next thing is access to the vaccine when it becomes time for the vaccine, and then working to do a public information campaign around making sure that people take the vaccine when it is more available to everyone. But in terms of what I campaigned on, it was the health, wealth, and safety disparities across the county and working to address those, which are racial disparities. It's just the way it breaks down if you look at the numbers.
And of course, for NASW, the vaccine and COVID continues to be a priority for us. So I think these areas are just like, oh, beyond the COVID pandemic and in conjunction with the COVID pandemic, these are areas that we're going to focus on. But we're really happy to have you, Justin, in Washtenaw County. Oftentimes, especially right now with the state budget being so strained, we look to communities to really pilot initiatives and to pass ordinances and things of that sort and allocate funding where it needs to be. And so to have champions in the local level can really help us as well on a state level. So, and vice versa.
Well, and just to kind of reinforce both of you, politics is local at the end of the day for the most part. I know the national gets a lot of the attention, but so much what impacts our everyday lives is done at local level government or state level government. And so figuring out as an association, we kind of have those two balls of wax. You have your chapter level, which is us here, and then we've got the national office. And so they're focusing on kind of those national level policy issues. And we can really hone in a little bit better here about specific things in Michigan, and even more if we want to go further down at the city level, we can do that as well. But I think that this is a good time for us then. We're going to break everybody into groups here. So we're going to go into 5 groups of 5, and we're going to meet until about 5:45, so a little more than 10 minutes. But I just want everybody to have the opportunity to share and to brainstorm really what has been on your mind politically, and what do you see as the primary political priorities on your wish list right now. This should primarily focus on Michigan, but if there are some national things that filter in there, we know that conversation is going to happen. So I'm going to ask if one person in each of the group wouldn't mind being kind of the scribe and the report back. We'll plan on coming back at around 5:45. But let me go ahead and get our breakout room started. We're going to have 5 rooms.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, before you break out into the rooms, I want us to also think about the 6 key policy priorities to guide us, but also if there are areas that don't fall within those buckets, of course, feel free to include those.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. All right. Well, let's plan on breaking into those rooms now, and we will meet back in about a little over 10 minutes.
Are the 3 of us going too?
Yes, I think you got assigned a room. Do you have anything that's popped up on your screen?
Yep, I'm all right. I'm headed there.
Great. Great.
We got cut out right at the good part. Abby just got cut.
That's how it always works. It's hard to get these conversations in a quick time, but I hope that everybody was able to at least have some good conversation in their groups. So I want to kind of bring us back. Algeria, are you going to take some notes for this section?
Yeah, let me pop open something to take some notes.
Yeah, this might be a fun thing to do on a regular or a semi-regular basis. So you got to like a nice. My group was great. I mean, I'm sure all the groups were great, but mine was really great. And if we want to keep getting people together to have these conversations, I think that's pretty cool.
Should I?
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great. And I highly recommend if folks are interested in continuing kind of the policy side to join our LSP committee. That's a good place where we kind of work out some of the nuts and bolts of what needs to happen in terms of a policy arena. But I can even just our group, there was only 4 of us, but the scope of what social workers work on and have like policy priorities on is really large, right? And so figuring out what's the next step and the best step going forward, I'm glad we're having that conversation today. So do we have a representative from Group 1 who'd like to share some of their groups?
I have a million tabs open, but we're going to get through it.
I think I was the scribe for Group 1, and our time went by really fast. I think some of our key takeaways, we were all obviously in support of the policy priorities that NASW has outlined. I think what kind of rose to the surface for us was just how all of us have really felt empowered to be more involved and to be more active in social policy and legislation. And that really not just encouraging social workers to vote, but to really become more involved. And NASW is a great way to do that. Many of us were on the call yesterday for the Social Justice and Anti-Racism Committee. So we're starting to see some familiar faces, as we continue to have these meetings. I think one thing that Algeria had mentioned, which is a really cool opportunity for social workers, is that we are experts in many fields. Social work spans a variety of topics and populations and needs. And so calling on social workers to serve as experts in many situations is going to be key. And then also, continuing to just look for opportunities and ways to contribute. So I think at the end of the day, especially with NASW-Michigan, it is what you make it. So for anybody who is a member, your level of involvement is up to you. You can participate in, 3 different committees if you wanted to. You can be actively involved. And so just really igniting social workers and empowering social workers to, give their time and their energy if they can, is going to be really powerful.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And if anything is left off, feel free to just type those into the chat box too, or if anybody else on the group would like to contribute.
Dwayne,
but Group 2.
I'll depend on you to let me know what's in there.
Will do. All right, our Group 2.
I don't know what group we were, what number. Maybe the other group doesn't either.
This always happens. Whoever was in the next group will put you down. But there's a spokesperson for one of the groups who would like to go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Elaine, I'm from Group 2, and it started out personal, and they say the personal is political. And the issue came up about accessing the vaccine, health issues, accessibility, racial bias in terms of, the disparity of people who have health insurance, and even if they have health insurance, the quality of the health providers. And then we got more back on track about, the issue of the changes that need to be made. For example, everyone should have health insurance. And so we really stayed focused on, for example, not just physical health accessibility, but mental health, and the changes with the pandemic and the isolation that a lot of people who are challenged with mental health issues have, even before the pandemic, but especially since the pandemic. So we didn't really get completed. We kind of ran out of time, kind of like what Justin said. It would have been nice to go a little longer because we were just kind of developing, but this was a really good opportunity to address what we see in our own practice, and what we see personally, like what matters to us, and especially with the pandemic.
Thank you, Elaine. All right, and I was part of group 3. Algier, I just typed ours into the chat box. So we talked about a few big, all of these are big things, right? So kind of going along with what the first 2 groups said, health equity is really important, and making sure that access is available across the board. And a big piece of that is the telehealth permanence, and making sure that both at the state and federal level that we can continue to practice using various methods of technology. But with that, we need to also make sure that we are improving our infrastructure so that access can actually happen. And so looking at, do folks have access to computers? Is internet access an option everywhere across the state, especially in rural settings? Cell towers? So some of those bolts and nuts infrastructure. And I think that is an area that I know that the Biden administration is focused on, but how can we also make sure that here in Michigan, that's a key thing. Continuing to solidify voting rights. As we saw this last election, there was a lot of concerns around voting, and making sure that everybody has the right to vote. Increasing our support to direct care workers and direct care social workers specifically, who've been on the front lines and essential throughout this entire pandemic, but are some of the least paid and least represented in a lot of circles, giving them more support. And then lastly, continuing to focus towards student loan forgiveness, both at the state and national level, because that is a huge burden for many of our new professionals. So that was our group.
Thank you, Dwayne. Do we just have 3 groups?
There are 5 groups.
Oh, okay. So group 4.
Hi, this is Pamela from group 4. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you perfectly.
Okay, so we talked about ensuring that legislation for the LGBTQI population gets put back through in Michigan. Talking again about predatory lending, understanding how that largely impacts vulnerable populations, looking to eliminate that in the state of Michigan, or at the very least lower the rates, understanding what a cyclical practice that can be for many. Also talking about joining MPACE or interest in MPACE and those efforts. Our conversation largely focused on COVID, understanding its rippling effects to evictions, vaccinations, trauma to our populations. What can we do to strengthen people? Equality of the vaccine in Michigan. What happens to disadvantaged populations of people? What happens to low-income people in the state of Michigan? What happens to people who can't get to testing sites, who can't get to a site to get a vaccination, to people who cannot read, to people who do not have internet access, to go online, to find out where they can do that, to developmentally disabled people, and to the level of mistrust and misinformation that's been spread. So how do we help clarify that? How do we help share the correct information amongst ourselves and to our populations? So yeah, I think that was a majority of what we talked about.
Awesome. I just want to say one thing that I am enjoying about this exercise so far is it seems to, all the feedback that you're giving us seems to also fit into some of the areas that we are focusing on this year. So that's great. And health, equity is certainly one of our priority areas, and the vaccine and access and equity, health equity is very important. So I'm happy to see that that's at the forefront of every group.
So I think we're the last group. Abigail, can I ask you to go? I think this would be a great opportunity to get your thoughts on the question that you wanted to ask out here.
Sure. I was asking the group to sort of give me some of their insight into the openness of the new legislature to proposals related to reproductive justice. Specifically, I'm up here at Northern Michigan University, and I have a group of policy planning and administration concentration students who are currently sort of researching and developing a plan about emergency contraception in the emergency room, specifically targeted at sexual assault victims, making that information available as a mandate in emergency rooms so that we can eliminate some of the disparities as to whether or not that information, Plan B is made available as an option for sexual assault victims in the emergency room. And we know that bills on this issue have been proposed in recent sessions, but haven't made it past committee. And so I was just sort of testing the waters to see if in a pandemic year, when this is the focus of much of the work that's getting done, if an issue like this is worth the investment of trying to get past now, or if it's worth waiting a little bit for a new window of opportunity to open to look at this issue. But I do think it is an access issue. It is a justice issue to healthcare. And so I think it can fit into these priorities that MPACE and LSP have put forth, but just looking for some direction from the group about taking this issue on at this point.
Yeah, thanks for that that policy priority point. I would say when it comes to sexual assault and sexual victimization, our domestic violence as well, and intimate partner violence, one of our strongest coalition partners is the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. So we work with them on many different issues, and this will be something that I think we certainly want to talk to them about. And even you, Abigail, as a social worker, just also talking to this group of folks to see where those things are, and if that's something that's possible to help reintroduce or pass during this legislative session.
The other thing that I'll add to that, Abigail, is I think the tricky part is we have a different set of our makeup in Michigan is very different than the federal government is going to be. We're going to have Republican-controlled Senate and House and a Democratic governor here in Michigan, where at the federal level, it's going to be Democrats across the board there. And so figuring out how do we be more, it's necessary here in Michigan to be more bipartisan if we want to get things passed, especially if it has anything to do with reproductive rights. I think if we were going to try to move forward with some of this, or if your students were going to try to move forward with this, especially in Northern Michigan, if you could get one of your Republican legislators to co-sponsor or to sign off, that's going to be really where this would have any chance probably to move forward in our current Michigan climate. From my guess of our legislative makeup, it seems like they would be very hesitant in general to take up a reproductive rights bill, even if it is primarily focused around the areas of sexual assault.
Okay, thank you. That's useful information and consistent with what I think the group was telling, my small group was talking about. And I will say that was part of the larger discussion. I didn't dominate the whole time we were in small group, but was that, just that the pandemic has put sort of when your world is topsy-turvy, it's very hard to prioritize some of these things. And we were sort of impressed with the ability to establish these clear priorities for the NASW. So we appreciate the guidance.
Thank you. Was that the main topic of Group 5? Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and get us all back here. Really great work that this group was able to discuss. Again, they fall within our buckets here for our policy areas. And I hope that together we can, work to advance all of these issues here. So, and
I think this
earlier about, oh, sorry, I was going to talk about LSP. LSP is our Legislative and Social Policy Committee. I mentioned earlier that helps us drive these policy priorities. It's a quick and easy way to get involved as it relates to policy. We meet every third Friday of the month. So this Friday we will meet. This is the third Friday, right? Or the third Friday of every month from 12 to 1:30. We've been hosting Zoom meetings. I believe in the past we have, we kind of operate in a sense where we can't always post publicly when our meetings are, especially because Zoom will be open. And we want to make sure that as we are strategizing, we aren't giving our strategies away, right, to potential individuals who could prevent us from moving our agenda forward. So if you are very interested in being a part of LSP or even calling into those meetings, just shoot me an email. I'll put you on the email list. You'll have access to the Zoom. Zoom is the same, and you can dial in every third Friday at that time.
Great, thanks, Algeria. I think this was a good example of, there's tons of things that we need to work on as social workers, right? We are involved in every community, in every kind of population area, and our reach is huge. And, NASW, you are NASW. Everybody on this call is our association. We just have a tiny staff that can help manage and help elevate your all voices. There are six staff here in Michigan, and so you've seen a few of us on this call, but really our members are the ones who help drive what we do and how our voice can be at the Capitol. So if you are faculty and you're teaching policy and you're writing policy briefs, we would love to be able to partner with you and elevate what we're working on. And if you can incorporate that into your coursework, it helps us kind of all as a social work community be able to push some of this forward. Or if there is something that you're working on at your organization or your agency that fits within our policy priorities, maybe you're testifying at the Capitol on behalf of your agency, but you're also a member. We want to recognize our members who are out there and putting themselves on the line, or if you're willing to write an op-ed or be on the news, we want to find people with various expertise across the board. But I think that's a really good transition point into talking about, not just Michigan, but when we think about kind of national level policy, some of what we already talked about fits within a national policy priority. And just so everybody is kind of aware of the processes, anytime that there is a new administration, NASW works to create a transition document. And so you can see the cover here for one of those for the Trump administration. But really what that is, and I think I put it in the chat earlier, but it's a guide from us as an association to that administration about what we view as top priority issues and what sort of policy issues we want to see moved forward under that administration. So, under the last administration, you can see they broke it into a few categories: social fabric, building a just society, strengthening the social work profession, child and family well-being, and of course then there's some specifics under that. But as we move into a new administration, obviously that we have some new wiggle room for what we view as opportunities to move forward. And so the national office this time around put out in November, right after the election, at least an initial letter to the Biden-Harris transition team, congratulating them on their win, but also then starting to at least throw out what our overarching policy, some of them would be coming up. And so you can see COVID-19 response, teletherapy permanence, Affordable Care Act, mental health expansion, police reform and public safety, and action on executive orders and regulations. And so we'll talk about a little bit those more in depth in a minute. But these sort of conversations come from a whole range of folks within the association, our members, our legislative teams across the country, our government relations staff, and then our national staff. And so anytime NASW is putting out something as it relates to a political thing, it's usually not just one person deciding that. It's a whole team and our membership kind of backing that up. And so these sort of conversations that we're having today are really critical to making sure that our members' voices are included in that. So the transition document for this next administration is currently being worked on at the national level. They're kind of in that finalizing process. And one of the things that they're hoping to do with the Biden-Harris administration is really to provide specific policy levels, specific policy priorities and bills that they want passed under a new administration. So as we talk today, I'm hoping that Algeria and I, if there are specific things that come out of our conversations, we're going to pass that feedback along to the national level. Oh, it sounds like I'm having some weird feedback. I'm not sure what that would be. I'm having some phone issues. Okay, good. Okay. if you do, feel free to type that into the chat box. But I did want, if you haven't seen, part of the reason we think that there's going to be some new opportunities for social work in the next administration is because there have already been social workers appointed to the next administration for various levels. If you weren't already aware, Joe Biden's daughter, Ashley, is a social worker. She has her degree from the University of Pennsylvania. She has a background in children, youth, family. She also did policy and practice in her MSW. But she worked with rehabilitation of prisoners, education youth around gang violence, and worked with social work and the arts. So kind of a very broad scope, but having a social worker in the immediate family of the president, we can hope and assume that there will be some conversations she will have with him about things that she would like to see. And as an association, we're very excited that there's a social worker that directly close to the president. Meg Cabot was appointed to oversee the agency review team for the VA. So also very exciting to have a social worker in the largest employer of social workers within the United States is the VA. Jared Bernstein, social worker, was picked to be on the Council of Economic Advisors. So we're really looking at financial social work. And as we talk about economic justice, we want to have social workers in those conversations. And then lastly, as we talk about COVID and community response to prevention, Michael Lindsay was appointed to the CDC's Community Preventative Services Task Force. So looking at health at the community level. And these are just a couple of the people so far that we know are social workers coming into the next administration. And one of the things that I learned this year is kind of what that process looks like at the national NASW level when there's a new administration and when appointments come through, is they actually get asked to provide letters of recommendation on behalf of various social workers, our national office does, to the transition administration. And so the national office had, at least with some of these folks, provided recommendations on behalf of our members for certain folks. So at some point, who knows, there could be Michigan folks, there could be people on this call that will want to get appointed, and know that NASW also has your back in those situations. I know that we also work to get social workers here locally on boards and on commissions and appointed to things like the Michigan Board of Social Work, and sometimes we'll write recommendation letters for social workers for those as well. And that process works very similar at the national level. So very exciting, though, to have a couple. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, beyond just social workers in the Biden administration, Michigan's Director of Health and Human Services, Robert Gordon, who was previously a part of the Obama administration, was appointed as an advisory member, I believe, to the Health and Human Services portion of the Biden administration. He really is able to oversee health issues. So that's very exciting to know that someone right here in Michigan who's been doing great work is going to be a part of the Biden administration in some capacity.
And the other thing that will be coming up in March that we just found out about is every year there's Social Work Day at the UN. And usually it's a very tiny group of social workers. It's open. Usually they open registration and it's filled within like 5 minutes. But this year it's going to be completely virtual. So they are having kind of an unlimited social work audience. At least that's how they've presented it so far. And so that's going to also be a way for social workers to be at a different sort of table as we look at global issues. And so as soon as registration information is available, we'll make sure that gets out. But I think that many of the folks on this call, and especially if you're also faculty, this would be a great opportunity for students. I believe it's going to be March 13th. And I'll make sure that before this call ends, I'll just double check that and put it into the chat box. But as I mentioned earlier, some of the priorities at the national level are going to mirror what we talked about already, and these were in that initial transition document, anything from COVID-19 response to teletherapy permanence and mental health service expansion. I know that the national office has been working on telehealth permanence basically since the start of the pandemic, because we have found that so many of our clients prefer teletherapy and telemental health services. And many of those policies have been written temporarily, or we have temporary approval for COVID. And I don't really know how that would look if we tried to go back to just removing that. I don't even know if the healthcare providers could do that in a way that makes sense. So we're working as an association to make sure that that happens. And you may see action alerts from us if we need you to write a particular insurance policy or company or a legislator around that. The other thing that the national office has put out recently, this was right after the election too, was a sign-on letter with many other organizations to cancel federal student debt on day one around executive action. So we know under this last administration, there has been tons of executive action taken. And we are working with the administration and we'll work with the next administration to push the social work policy agenda through that avenue as well, if the legislative arena is not the best option. Are there any questions about kind of the national level priorities?
I have one question. There's going to be a lot of transition, obviously. A whole bunch of the federal agencies are going to have to really reestablish themselves. Is there a list of priorities that NASW has assembled to kind of help the incoming administration prioritize? Obviously, there's some things that can be quickly rolled back or reestablished or addressed, commissions that need to be seated, or
So I can answer that.
Thank you.
So a part of the introductory letter to the administration was to outline some of the areas that NASW is interested in focusing on. And I believe that is what Dwayne mentioned there. Maybe we can put that in the chat box. But as it relates to the transition document, that's broader. And it's a guide to the administration on what we want to work on, what we think that the administration should work on, but also where we can provide some guidance. Based on conversations with our national government relations team, they're feeling very confident that, you know, they can work strongly with the administration, and those roundtables will be open back up that were closed previously, and they'll be more involved and engaged. I know one area that they'll very much so be engaged in is around justice, immigration, and health equity. That is where some of those initial key points came from. So, but they're still in the transition process like everyone else, waiting for committee assignments and I guess going through this impeachment process as well. So you'll hear more from them for sure.
Yeah, and Sarah, I see your comment not seeing immigration on the list. Yeah, absolutely. That will be included in the larger document with the national office that they're providing. But there are so many major issues, right, that we have to kind of either work forward or roll back and then go forward, that even immigration didn't even come up as one of our major topics today. But yeah, that's a huge piece of it. And there's so much that needs to be done on that. So I absolutely know that that will be some sort of specific policy in that agenda. But if there are, you know, some of our social work members have much more insight about specific agencies or departments within the federal government. So if you have a specific thing that you think needs to happen next, feel free to send that over to Algeria and I, and we can make sure that that gets up to the national folks, because they may not know every agency in and out. And so if there is insight from anybody here, or if you know folks who have good thoughts, feel free to share that with us. And I did just find that the social work day with the UN, it's March 16th from 12 to 2. So it doesn't look like registration information is open yet, but feel free to save that date for Social Work Month. All right, so kind of for our last 10 minutes or so, we wanted to switch kind of gears into how to stay engaged going forward. We've talked a lot about policy priorities, but how can we actually make those happen? So let's move into that conversation.
All right, I'm going to move kind of quickly through it since we're running out of time, and I still wanted to have answer questions that people had. So what I have here, these are the 6 areas that research into political social work really covers as ways in which people can get engaged. The research really focuses on 5 of the 6. There's a 6th one I usually add when I talk about this, and we'll get to it as we go. So let's go on to the next slide. All right, great. So this first method of getting involved looks at, it's often talked about as political justice. So it's ways in which social workers can be involved in empowering communities. So, and this is really something you can do whether your job is a policy or political focused job or not. So this focuses a lot on doing a lot of voter education, voter registration, and helping people get engaged in their local community. I think voter registration is something that, I mean, all social workers should be doing. If I had my way, all nonprofits or government agencies would include the question of, would you like to be registered to vote as part of their intake process? Because contrary to what a lot of people will tell you or may believe, that doing voter registration does not count as political activity. So, I mean, nonprofits are limited in the kind of how much political activity they can do, and they can do some. But voter registration does not count towards that. So I think all nonprofits should be engaged in helping register people to vote. So let's see. So this one, the highlights from this are voter education, voter registration, and getting people engaged. We'll go on to the next slide. All right, so with this one, influencing policy agendas, we talked a little bit about this in my group earlier. This is a great way to stay engaged with NASW or other advocacy organizations. So what this looks like is helping certain issues get on the radar for candidates or elected officials or people that are in government agencies and can have some freedom to make certain policy changes. It's a lot harder to get somebody out of office that doesn't share your values No, it's a lot. Sorry, it's a lot easier to get somebody out of office that doesn't share your values than it is to get somebody to act in a way that's not in accordance with their own values. So one way to get involved with this is get involved with candidates and help shape their agenda. I told you what my platform was earlier when I was running for office, and that's what I'm working towards. So engage in the next campaign cycle, work with candidates and help shape what they're going to be focusing on. Advocacy organizations like NASW are a great way to do that. Don't ignore those emails you get, those action alerts when it says call your representative and say vote no on whatever. That's really important. Something I really push voting and voter registration, but something I'm going to be also pushing now is encouraging people to give public comment at public meetings. Like, I want people to come to my county commission meetings and give public comment about issues that are important to them and issues that are on the agenda. That's one way to move policymakers and elected officials in a certain direction. And working with groups like NASW is a great way to do that. So go to the next one. All right, engaging with political parties. This is one that I talk a lot more about than is present in the literature, because political parties can look so different across the country. I got a lot of my political experience from doing volunteer work with my county Democratic Party and political parties at different levels. So in Michigan, the way we have it broken down, well, so just the two major political parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party across the country, they all have a state. Each state has their own party, and then below that, each congressional district has their own party. And then for the most part, every county has their own party. And then some places, even more locally than that, like a city or a town might have their own club. I strongly recommend getting involved with whatever your, I kind of know from talking to everybody where they kind of lean on the spectrum, but where you lean on the political spectrum, get involved with your political party. I think the county level is a great way to be involved. It helps you get to know the people that are doing great work in your county. It helps you get to know the elected officials in your county. And you can, as social workers, you can really change what the party stands for, what the party does. So for example, I've been on the executive board for our county Democratic Party for a number of years, and being at the decision-making table on like actions that we're going to take as a party, that's helped change decisions that we've made and get us engaged in other kinds of activities that maybe if there weren't social workers around. I've also recruited former students to get on there too. So it's a great way to start getting that experience too, because it's a position you run for within the party. So to give you an example, work that our county Democratic, we do food drives, we do supply drives, and we do a lot of voter education work in the community. And those are things that you can have influence on if you get into some of those kinds of positions. What else is a good one? Become a precinct delegate. So in Michigan, being a precinct delegate is a really important thing. If you typically, those spots go unfilled. So a precinct delegate is an office you run for, like your name will appear on the ballot. So that's always really cool. And so you run for precinct delegate. Every precinct is allotted a certain number of delegate spots based on what voter turnout looked like for each political party in that one. So if you're in a precinct that has a lot of Republicans, then there are going to be a lot of Republican slots for precinct delegate if you're one, and then less for the Democrats and vice versa. So fill those spots, and the two political parties handle them very differently. There are certain things that precinct delegates do. Typically, okay, so let me tell you, I told you what it is, but like you actually do. That's what will entice you to run for it. So a precinct delegate is your responsibility as a precinct delegate is basically to keep the people in your precinct informed about what's going on with government issues and political issues. And really, it's a community organizing kind of position. You don't get paid anything. It's a volunteer kind of elected office, but it's a good way for you to start doing some organizing in your community. And we've talked about all politics is local. This is where the precinct delegates come in. These are the people that recruit people into the party and get them out to vote. So that's good for now. If there's time, I can talk specifics later. Let's go to the next one.
And let me just add to that real quick, Justin. So one of the other ways people can get involved in the parties too is caucuses. So most within the Democratic or the Republican Party, at the state level, there are caucuses that are more issue-based, so environmental, LGBT, women's, labor. I was a vice chair of one of the caucuses at one of the parties too, and that's how you can also work within the party platform, or if you're really passionate about one area, that's a really good way to get involved. And I can just echo the get involved with your county party. I was lucky enough to be kind of stranded up north in Northeast Michigan for most of the pandemic this summer at my grandparents' house, and I wanted to still get involved. So I reached out to the local party up there, and they're a very small group of mostly older volunteers who've been party volunteers for a long time. And so my contribution was social media and designing a new website. So you never know what sort of skills you might be able to bring in that are like not really political, but really can help organize locally. So just another plug for that local involvement.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, so our County Democratic Party has a ton of different committees. We've got people that focus on communications. So people that have either a degree in communications or really like it, they get on this committee and help us with what we do for communications. We got outreach. There's a ton there. And then I do want to echo the importance of the party platform. So that usually gets overlooked by people. So when you sit around, if you like to do this, watch the DNC and the RNC conventions and see how they do all their stuff. And then when they nominate where they pick their nominee, that's also when they're voting on what the party what a party stands for. And there's a document, you can read it for all the political parties, including the minor parties like the Green Party, the Libertarians. And it's a list of the priorities for each of the parties, and you can have a say in what's reflected in those. Good. Holding professional and political staff appointments. So this is one where if you want to start making a shift towards this being your job, look for opportunities to work for an elected official or work for in a civil service position for the government. At the state level, they have state representatives and state senators have a smallish budget to hire staff. They usually can have 2, 3, maybe sometimes a little bit more staff people. And you could be one of those people. You could also look to work for like the Department of Health and Human Services, where you're doing some of that execution of policy. So it's a really important place to be. Working in appointed office is really, really important. And Dwayne touched on that earlier about how if you're looking for different appointments, sometimes the NASW can help with a letter. There are appointments at every level of government. There are different boards, committees, and commissions. These tend to be volunteer positions, but it's a great way to start getting involved with some real policy experience. That's also how I got a lot of my experience. So before becoming county commissioner, I was serving on a number of different county boards. And so what this looks like is people tend to be most familiar with the federal government. You know how Congress people sit on a ton of different committees. More at the local level, the way that looks is as county commissioner, I have a bunch of different committees I'm assigned to, but instead of it being all county commissioners on those committees, it's usually 1 or 2, and then the rest of the people are residents that have a particular area of that's their area of expertise. So I've served on the Board of Health for the county, the Community Action Board, which focuses on addressing economic inequality, and a few others. So the purpose of that is so you can advise the elected officials about policy issues, and then they take that back and do that work at that elected level. And they exist at the state level too, but I highly recommend doing that. Go to the next one.
And I know we do have at least one elected or appointed official on the call, Ken. Ken, do you want to just quickly talk about what position you're in and how you got on that?
Hi, yeah. In September of last year, I was appointed by my city after I applied in January of 2020. But I was appointed by my city council in September to be a trustee to the library advisory board of my city. And then once I was appointed to become the treasurer of the board. So we basically advise and make policy for the city library. So, we're a diverse city, the city I live in Oak Park. So I'm cognizant of my responsibility to address the needs of both cultural and religious diversity of the city as it relates to serving the citizens of Oak Park.
Great, thank you, Ken.
There's a question in the chat about what does the time commitment look like for some of these things that we're talking about. So to address what does the time commitment look like for some local appointed positions, typically those committees meet once a month for an hour and two, and then you are supposed to do some work in between. So it's not a huge commitment. And that's why many people serve on multiple at the same time. All right. And then this slide focuses on getting engaged with electoral campaigns. So there's a lot of campaigns, whether it's for a ballot initiative or for a candidate, always need volunteers. you should definitely take a look at doing that. We have the nonpartisan redistricting commission because of volunteers, which is absolutely incredible. Yeah, and you can always work on encouraging other people to run for office. And then this last slide is talking about you running for office yourself, which is something I strongly recommend. I'm always trying to get more social workers to get involved in politics and run and help elevate social work in that way. And I'm going to go through, go to the next slide. This next slide is this book that's also behind me. It's written by Shannon Lane and Suzanne Pritzker. This was the first textbook on political social work that had come out. Highly recommend the book. I got it behind me. I use portions of it in my classes, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a political social work training program that I have at the University of Michigan. It's an online program where you get 28 CEUs. So if you like what I was talking about in this rushed go through of it, I could talk about it a lot more in this 28-hour program. I'm teaching all 28 of the hours. So 27 of the hours are asynchronous, where I had worked to recruit some of the experts in all the different areas that we cover, including Shannon Lane and Suzanne Pritzker, Charles Lewis, and a lot of other people. I'll go through, just go to the next slide and show you some of the things that you learn about in the program if you're interested. So take a look, you learn about theories and research in political social work, that focus on political justice that I talked about before. So that first domain of political social work, ethics. The ethics one, I get a lot of good positive feedback on that because it gives you different frameworks to address ethical challenges that you might encounter in political settings. Bridging divides is a good one too, because I mean, we got a lot of divide in our country. We can see that, and social work, I think, can be in a great position to overcome those. And engaging elected officials and inside perspective. State Senator Stephanie Chang was very kind to do a lecture for us, and that's her talking about what it's like to serve as an elected official, an elected social worker. Go to the next slide. And this module gives you, I'm not going to read all these, gives you a wide variety of tools to engage in political social work practice. So we go over coalition building, activism, public discourse, a lot of them. Next slide. And this is a special knowledge area one. So you learn more about political parties, or where social work and immigration fit together, and environmental justice. And over time, I'm going to continue to add to those different topic areas that we talk about, or there in the different skill areas over time. Got through it. That's it right there. That we can skip that. Mostly, I don't think there's any MS or BSWs that are looking to get an MSW, but we were able to recently launch the policy and political social work pathway at the University of Michigan. It's this, I was lucky to be able to come into the school at this time where I could help redesign our curriculum. And we now have a major that focuses on policy and political social work. So if you know any BSWs that are looking for MSW, or anybody else looking for an MSW program, here you go. This is what our concentration in political social work is. But that online certificate program is for CEUs, so it's for professionals, and all of you could take that. And I think that's the last slide I've got.
Great, thank you for that plug, Justin. You know, the more political training we can have, the better. And we did a campaign school last year, and we'll see. We'll be doing one again at some point in the near future. It may not be this next year, just depending on COVID and how that rolls out, but we want to make sure that there are more and more social workers running for office. The Nancy Humphrey School of Social Work out of Connecticut has a political social work program that's really excellent and does some good training on that. But I know we are at time for today, so I want to be cognizant of that and thank everybody for your contributions today. This was, I think, a really good conversation. There's been so much going on in the political arena, especially in the last 6 months and year, that we have really appreciated our members' feedback, our members stepping forward to lead conversations, to start new groups. And we know that there's so much more work to be done here in the next year or years, that we appreciate you being here. Does anybody have any last questions or comments?
I was just going to say, before we all go, if there's anyone who wants to put a little reaction up on the screen about whether or not we should do this again. So a thumbs up or no reaction if you think we should host these more often.
Cameras are off, so it's kind of hard. They might be thumbs up and we can't see it. So I don't know.
Hey, if you don't put a thumbs up, we understand. Okay. Well, that is good feedback. Hopefully we can do a few more of these, or these on a more consistent basis.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for coming. We will have some political content also at the annual conference in April. So you could check that out if you're looking for some more CEs coming up in the next couple of months. But we'll go ahead and wrap that up here for tonight. Thanks everyone for joining, and we hope you have a good rest of your week. Bye everyone.